The night I finally opened that spreadsheet, I wasn't expecting a revelation. I wasn't expecting to uncover a deep truth about money. I just wanted to stop guessing. For nearly 3 years, I had been living with a low-level hum of anxiety in the background of my life. It is the kind of feeling you probably know well. It is the feeling you get when you stand at a checkout counter, hand over your debit card, and hold your breath for just a fraction of a second, waiting to see if the little screen says approved. At the time, I was in my early 30s, working as a retail manager at a mid-sized store. On paper, it sounded like a solid, respectable job. I had a title, I wore pressed button-down shirts, and I managed a team. But the reality of my daily life was completely disconnected from the image I was projecting. I spent 9, sometimes 10 hours on my feet. I dealt with endless inventory issues, answered to regional directors who only cared about margins, and spent my afternoons apologizing to frustrated customers. By the time I unlocked the door to my apartment at night, my lower back ached and my mind was entirely numb. Because I was the manager, I felt a quiet, unspoken pressure to look the part. I bought clothes that required dry cleaning. I picked up the tab for coffee when I had meetings with my staff. I upgraded my phone every time a new one came out. Nothing wildly extravagant, just enough to look like I had everything under control. But I didn't. Whenever my credit card statements arrived in the mail, I would toss them into a kitchen drawer, unopened. I told myself I was just too tired to look at them. The truth was, I was terrified of the math. I survived by only looking at the minimum payment due in my email, paying it, and ignoring the total balance. I told myself that my only problem was my salary. I believed that one day, a magical promotion would arrive and fix everything. Then came a quiet Tuesday night in November. The weight of not knowing had finally become heavier than the fear of finding out. I sat down at a small desk in my living room. The apartment was completely silent. I opened a blank spreadsheet. I started pulling up statements from different banks. I typed in the balance of a credit card I was using just to buy groceries. I typed in the balance of a store card I used to buy those dress shirts. I added a small personal loan I had taken out 2 years prior and tried to forget about. It wasn't a sports car that ruined my finances. It wasn't a luxury vacation. The math was actually painfully boring. It was $40 here for a dinner out because I was too tired to cook. It was $15 there for a subscription I forgot to cancel. It was $300 on one credit card just to pay the minimum balance on another. When I highlighted the column, the auto sum feature calculated the total at the bottom of the screen. The number was $6,200. I sat there for a long time. I didn't panic. I didn't throw anything. The room was just very quiet. That number wasn't a tragedy, and it wasn't a massive, life-destroying amount of debt, but it was heavy. It was the result of 1,000 small decisions made by someone who was trying to look successful instead of actually building stability. That number was the first honest thing I had seen about my own life in years. I didn't fix it that night. I didn't create a massive, life-changing budget. I just found a pen, wrote that one number down on a physical piece of paper, and closed the laptop. That is where this whole journey actually started. Not with a brilliant investment plan, but with one honest, slightly uncomfortable number on a page. We often hear that a small salary is the absolute reason people cannot build stability. Society tells us that until you cross a certain income threshold, financial peace is simply out of reach. We are told to hustle harder, find a side income, or look for a secret investment strategy. But having lived on both sides of that $6,200 deficit, I can tell you something different. The quiet truth is that the size of your paycheck is only one part of the equation. The far bigger issue, the one almost nobody talks about, is the complete lack of a plan for the 48 hours immediately after that paycheck arrives. Today, we're going to look closely at the gap between what feels like wealth on payday and what actually creates quiet stability a week later. We'll explore the behavioral traps we fall into and how you can step out of the loop without needing a massive raise. The first thing we have to understand is something called the payday illusion. If you're earning a modest income and you're working physically or mentally exhausting hours to get it, money stops functioning as just a mathematical tool. It becomes an emotional release valve.
Let's look at a case study to see how this works. Let's say there is someone named Marcus. He's 24 years old. He works as an attendant at a large supermarket. He isn't lazy. In fact, he works harder than most corporate executives. He wakes up before sunrise, walks 40 minutes to work, and spends 8 hours carrying heavy boxes, organizing shelves, and standing on a hard concrete floor. By the time he walks home, his back hurts. His uniform is soaked with sweat. He has traded a massive amount of his physical energy for a very small amount of money. Because his salary barely covers his survival, Marcus feels a deep, quiet frustration. But once a month, payday arrives. The notification hits his phone. For the next 48 hours, a psychological shift happens. Marcus's brain tricks him into believing he has acquired new, permanent wealth. His friends call him to go out. They tell him he works hard and deserves a break. And Marcus agrees. He doesn't just go out. He buys a new jacket for the evening. He goes to a club and buys drinks that cost the equivalent of 3 hours of his labor. He takes photos, trying to project an image of someone who is doing perfectly fine. For a few hours on a Friday night, he feels important. He feels successful. Here's the quiet part most people miss. Marcus isn't spending that money because he's foolish. He's spending it because he's exhausted. He's paying what I call the exhaustion tax. He's paying his hard-earned money to briefly buy back his dignity, to feel visible, and to numb the physical reality of his daily life. This is a documented behavioral pattern. According to consumer behavior data, a significant portion of paycheck-to-paycheck stress doesn't just come from fixed costs like rent. It comes from the emotional discretionary spending that happens within the first 3 days of getting paid. When people feel economically trapped, they're actually more likely to spend money on immediate, visible status symbols. When you can't afford a house, buying a very expensive dinner feels like the only way to experience the lifestyle you're locked out of. We work ourselves to the bone, and then we spend the money to briefly forget how hard we just worked. But we all know what happens next. By Tuesday, the illusion evaporates. His wallet is light. His bank app shows a number dangerously close to zero. The heavy feeling in his chest returns, and he begins the silent, agonizing process of counting the days until the next paycheck, again and again. Spending your money to escape the reality of your exhausting job usually guarantees that you'll have to keep working that exact same job forever. It's a circle. The exhaustion causes the spending causes the poverty causes the exhaustion. Breaking this cycle rarely happens because someone yells at you or tells you to stop buying coffee. It usually happens through a quiet, uncomfortable moment of observation. For me, it was that Tuesday night with the spreadsheet. For Marcus, in our case study, it happened on a Saturday evening as he was walking home. The sun was setting. The neighborhood was relatively quiet. As he passed a row of rental houses, he noticed a conversation happening on the sidewalk. There was no loud argument. There was no dramatic scream match. It was actually terrifyingly quiet. A man was standing next to 2 small bags for his family's belongings. His head was lowered. The landlord was standing there, calmly explaining that he couldn't wait any longer for the rent. Marcus stood on the opposite side of the street and watched. He realized that the man wasn't unemployed. He wore a uniform. He worked every day, just like Marcus. But working hard without a plan leaves you completely exposed to gravity. In that quiet moment on the sidewalk, he looked down at the expensive jacket he had bought the week before. He did the math in his head. The cost of that jacket and the drinks he bought on Friday was exactly the amount of money that family probably needed to keep a roof over their head for another month. He realized that the gap between looking fine on a Friday night and standing on the sidewalk with nowhere to go is often just one missed paycheck. He didn't suddenly become wealthy standing on that street corner, but a shift happened. He realized that his small salary wasn't his biggest enemy. His biggest enemy was the version of himself that emerged in the 48 hours after payday. The fear of staying trapped finally became stronger than the desire to look rich. If this kind of thinking is useful to you, the subscribe button is right there. That's really the only way this channel keeps going. We're trying to build a quieter, calmer corner of the internet here, and I'd love for you to join us. When you finally realize that the cycle is broken, The modern instinct is usually to download a complicated budgeting app. We try to use technology to fix a behavioral problem. But when I closed my laptop that night with my $6,200 debt, I didn't open an app. The next day, I went to a store and bought a plain paper notebook. I own a smartphone with multiple banking apps installed, and I still write every purchase by hand in a notebook that cost less than a coffee. Why? Because of physical friction. When you swipe a card or tap your phone, the transaction is completely frictionless. It happens in a fraction of a second. The tech industry has spent billions of dollars making sure it's as easy and painless as possible for your money to leave your account. Your brain doesn't have time to process the loss of resources. But when you sit down with a pen and a piece of paper, you are fighting against that system. You have to uncap the pen. You have to